This is Willpower.
Today on the podcast, we are diving deep on the discourse around traditional Chinese medicine and cold. In general, why there are many people out there saying don't ever experience or put your body through anything that is cold because it is detrimental for your health. There are people poo-pooing that. There are people saying, no, that's wrong. It's fine to do cold. What, when, how, what are the circumstances? What is the traditional thought in a very top-line overview of traditional Chinese medicine around cold? And we have Carrie Bacon from Carrie Bacon Wellness joining us today. She is a dear friend. She has I've gotten a chance to know her over the last year and a half. She's based in Puerto Rico and leading the Puerto Rico section of Cold Plunge Club, which is just a wonderful opportunity for people to be able to experience it in an island that has, sunshine, heat, and beautiful ocean waves. She is a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner for over 15 years. She's been working 20 plus years in the health and wellness landscape, bodywork, yoga, and ancient bodywork modalities. And she talks today with us about cold, about TCM, traditional Chinese medicine's thoughts, and where we may be able to stretch and understand cold, not as a black and white option, yes, or a definite no, but as a possibility for specific times in our lives, times of the month, times with our friends, for every human body on the planet, and how we can utilize and make the best choices given our intuition, our physiology, and our health landscape, the best choices for ourselves, and really empowering you with some of this knowledge and information. And if you're working in the traditional Chinese medicine landscape or you're listening to this and you have feedback or things you want to share, this is just an open-ended conversation around what ways we can apply cold and how, and when there are times that maybe we don't want to be applying cold as well, or understanding that duration means a lot, understanding that temperature means a lot, and we need to have the awareness to lean into our best health in this way. Carrie Bacon and I have had the opportunity to do a couple seminars, workshops at retreats, and now we have recorded this live so we can share more insight with you. I know that you will love listening to her take on all this information. Please feel free to drop a line into the show or connect the dots. More to come on this, and we are leaning into traditional Chinese medicine and cold therapy. Let's go. Welcome to the Wellpower Podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Weitzel. Together, we explore health optimization tools that propel you from comfort to courage, illuminating the path together to a remarkable life through breath, cold, and biohacking. Beautiful. We're here on the Wellpower Podcast with a much anticipated episode to share the controversy and the excitement and the conversation and the on-trend everything. I'm here with Carrie Bacon, who is a dear friend, a colleague within the Sherpa Breath and Cold community, also a practitioner of ancient bodywork modalities for over 15 years, practicing traditional Chinese medicine, 15 plus 20 years almost in the health and wellness landscape, just leaning in on so many ways that you support people through yoga, through bodywork, traditional Chinese medicine, and through all your gifts that you bring in the breath and cold arena. Welcome to the show, Carrie Bacon.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm so happy that we get to finally have this bigger conversation about the interface and all the charge around the ideas of Chinese medicine and intentional cold exposure.
Yeah, it's important. There's, and all the charge, we should say. But First, let's talk about that sort of landscape and the reason that we decided to have this podcast. We want to dive a little bit deeper. And also the fact that you and I, as connected as we are, as like-minded as we are in so many ways, just that we wanted to give voice to all sides of the conversation around cold, especially and specifically when it comes to traditional Chinese medicine practices, to share with other people, and that this whole podcast, and as we record this conversation, to share with others in the world that there are always going to be a wide array of opinions, that there is always intuition at play, there are always bio-individual decisions that we are not trying to take away from anyone. And we want to share, I think, the breadth of conversation and knowledge so that people can consider with an open mind where all of this fits together for them in their own specific practices, albeit cold or otherwise. We will focus a lot on cold today. I know that you will bring such beautiful knowledge because we've had these conversations in small group settings at our retreats. and many other ways on social media, short little bursts. And so today we get to speak specifically about this landscape of cold therapy. So cold therapy, Chinese medicine, let's talk about the discourse that's going on right now. Maybe you can enlighten some people, because some people, maybe my listeners of the Well Power podcast, interested in cold and wanting to know sort of what's going on here. So let's set the framework for them, if you will.
So as we talk about all the time, context is everything. The context for the individual and the context in what way we're using the word cold. And one of the things that I constantly think to myself is the phrase both and. So in Chinese medicine, cold is one of the causes of dis-ease. You can interrupt the physiology and the wellness of a system with cold, heat, wind, damp, and dry. And they often have parties and intermingle with one another in our system. You can also have these, so it's qi of the body. You can have it externally imposed onto your body, or it's something that can be internally generated. And so in Chinese medicine, cold is a cause of disease. It disrupts physiology. I look at it that both cold can be a creator of greater wellness and also can be a disruptor of that greater wellness. And I think what's so special about some of these conversations we have is that if you understand intentionally putting yourself in a bath of ice water, what you're actually doing is only momentarily bringing the body into extreme cold so that the body learns better how to withstand, adapt, and acclimate, push out the stressor of cold. So the way I've been contemplating it lately is cold therapy, intentionally exposing yourself to cold, is actually a pathway to have better tolerance to and resilience against the ways we could be affected by external cold that could cause disease.
Yeah, which is so interesting. And just to frame it up a bit for everyone else, there's the quote unquote controversy, which I don't even like to use that word, but the conversation and the discourse around traditional Chinese medicine and cold therapy. That could be ice baths, wild swimming, cold water swimming, walking in your booty shorts out in the winter, any of it. You and I have both seen quite a bit as cold exposure has come on the scene and had this meteoric rise, that there are practitioners out there that are just blanketing and getting on to social saying, do not get in cold. This is not good, especially for females, right? And that's a big focus of this show, is also around female health, but just in general for people across the board to say, hey, getting in cold is not a great idea, period. That's where some of this conversation, of course, where I came to you right away and we spoke at the retreat to say, hey, can you talk on this topic? It was bubbling up so much that the things you planned to talk about at the retreat were like, can we talk about this instead? Because you bring this wealth of knowledge. So for all the listeners out there, this is what Carrie's specifically speaking to, is the nuance that exists within that structure and how we can understand the variables of utilizing cold in the world of Chinese medicine and how there's a possibility and there's space for all.
Yeah. And one of the big ones that's come up on social media a lot is cold in the womb, right? So like I said, cold can enter the body. If you think of a contained space and all of a sudden you empty it out, it's now a space where something can go. So I've seen a lot of practitioners, and you've actually come to me to help handle the conversations where they're talking about not wanting women to go into cold because of the potential of cold entering the womb. And this is something that we spoke about at the level 2, that I was actually one of those individuals who had cold in my womb. I went swimming in a freezing cold lake on my 3rd menstrual cycle, and then ended up with a cascade of the next 15, 17 years of my life dealing with dysmenorrhea, delayed cycles, clotting, stabbing pain. And then I'm in class in one of our fundamentals classes where we learn all of the theory of Chinese medicine. And it very eloquently and in artistic language talks about cold entering the womb when the womb is made vacuous, meaning we've gone through a menstrual shed, we're bleeding, we're creating a vacuum, there's space for it to go, and swimming in a cold lake, the cold entering the womb. And I'm sitting there and I went, oh my gosh, that's me. I have 35-day cycles instead of 28-day cycles. I started passing large clots when I was 13 years old. I had sharp stomach pains that almost sent me to the hospital 6 months into having menstrual cycles. And it wasn't until I was treated with herbs that break up stasis, so break up the blood clotting in the womb, acupuncture to regulate the cycle, and heat. We used moxa to disperse the cold because I spent hours on end swimming in a freezing cold lake on my menstrual cycle and cold when in my womb. I used Chinese medicine to treat it. Do I suggest that all women go into ice baths on their menstrual cycle? I do not. Do I say that they can't? I also do not say that. I say it's nuance and context. And one of the things that I think people miss when they're looking at intentional cold exposure is that one of the first things that we talk about for safety is where's your heat source? So we talk about that for the full system, but we can also talk about that for the womb. For a woman who wants to plunge around her cycle or even on her cycle, I was very injured. I needed to get in the cold plunge to help bounce out of a spinal sprain. I had my menstrual cycle. I still went in the ice bath. I just put a heat lamp over my uterus and I treated myself with moxa, and I did not develop cold in the womb symptoms after that. So it's understanding the context of the human and understanding the collaboration of effort for the wellness that can happen. You can both use cold on your system and also use heat on your system.
Yeah, and these are important points for sure. I just want to reiterate that it's like, you're not saying it's don't ever go in on your cycle, but you are saying, and I think we've had some conversation around the few days leading up to your cycle and when you have your period, it's an okay time to skip it if you're worried about these things. And also that we have tools and controls like various sources of heat. And you and I have talked about how we both have like a red light therapy pad we can use or heat lamp or things like that, that we can align with that specific time of the month if we're using it or we're wanting to mitigate that, which is not stunting the value of being in a cold tub. And also women could just decide, hey, this week I'm going to stay out.
Yeah. So one of the other things that they talk about with cold and the cycle is not wanting to disrupt hormones. The thing is, hormetic stressors make us better and more resilient at producing our hormones. Cold is a hormetic stressor. Heat is a hormetic stressor. Breath is a hormetic stressor. We can choose which ones, but I think that it's an interesting thing. And I understand it. And I see my colleagues, you go through this thing where you work to establish yourself and to show how powerful a healing modality is. And you talk to your patients about the different versions of cold that can disrupt their system. And the next thing you know, the hottest, newest thing in wellness is to jump in a cold plunge. And now your patients are saying to you, but I thought cold was bad for me. Like, oh, wait, which cold? Do I want you chugging a bunch of ice water when you eat? No, I don't. Because, I mean, from a biomedicine perspective, we look at the fact that drinking a bunch of fluids dilutes your hydrochloric acid. In Chinese medicine, you're literally putting out your digestive fire. When you need to heat up, rot and ripen and mash food to its most digestible pieces, I don't want you throwing ice water on a gut. I just don't. And if you really crave that, there are other things that I'm going to look in your system. If you crave having ice water all the time, I'm going to wonder what other underlying conditions of heat you might have. And so I say that, and this is a conversation about cold, where context is always the most important thing to keep at the front of our minds.
Totally. It's what we talk about at Trip Breath and Cold all the time, right? Context is king and safety is queen.
And so it's also like, who is the person that's in front of me? We also talked about my experience with typhoid and coming back from India, emaciated, 98 pounds, and knowing that I needed to make my system more resilient to heal. I was not throwing my body into 37-degree ice baths. I was stripping down into a tank top and booty shorts and going into the vegetable cooler at Costco and making myself stand there for 10 breaths and then running right out. Because it's looking at...
It's this titration, right? It's like the titration and the scalability. This is like Dr. Stacey Sims just was on the podcast and she talked a lot about endurance athletes and women like, how do we play in the space of 55 degrees, 50 degrees, and knowing that we can bring the temp up if we need to. And with some of our athletes too, like the swimmers, right, in the triathlon circuit, they're working in that degree range because they want to be in a cold ocean. And what they don't want to have happen is mammalian dive reflex, and their heart rate slows because they are racing.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're training for as well, right? Which is such a different external layer or an additional layer of context onto the mix. So I think you and I see this a lot, this hard and fast lines, and we see of like lines drawn in the sand, like you can or you cannot, very black and white. And then also seeing, the conversation about some women are like appalled that women are going in pregnant. And then the Chinese medicine conversation comes, and it's just becoming, as cold exposure is more and more in trend, these things they're bubbling up to the surface. And they're, again, like, as we are so wonderful, and this is not about females versus males, but just physiological females, quite often we have a good opportunity to share, take in the whole vision of the landscape and really share from a positive place. And I think that's what we're wanting to do is educate and highlight around these areas.
If you can ditch the dogma, you can find the nuance, right? And so at Sherpa, one of my favorite stories of cold is I treated a number of firefighters when I was back at my practice in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it started because the training captain came in. He was the husband of a dear friend of mine, came in with Bell's palsy. He had a facial droop. He took the guys through a day of hot, sweaty, open pore fire training, and they get through their tactical training, and they immediately get shunted into this classroom with AC blowing on the sides of their faces. And he's up there presenting. The AC happened to be directly at his face. That night, he told his wife that he felt like he had grains of sand in the corner of his eye, and his eye wouldn't stop watering, and he woke up with a facial droop. And so this is where, again, the pores open wide like a vacuum. All that sweat pours out, all the yang pours out with it, and now I have a cold wind blowing on my face. And it's actually the classic presentation of Bell's palsy, that somebody had a window open and they had cold winter air blowing on their face in the car, or AC blowing on them, or they'll complain of contracted shoulder because they were in a hotel and they couldn't get the AC or the fan off of their shoulder. And so I used acupuncture and moxa to disperse the cold out of the channels and collaterals, along with some bleeding techniques and peripheral points to help disperse the cold that was disrupting the physiology. And we were able to successfully treat the palsy. That's a big one. Or a butcher coming in with hot contracted joints because he spent a life handling very cold, damp, so cold and damp meat with bare hands, or maybe like sanitation gloves, but nothing that's actually protecting. And next thing you know, you have hot, contracted, swollen joints, but it's not heat causing the problem. It's a cold that's been trapped in there. There's no systemic effect happening. And so one of the big things that gets missed with looking at the physiology of putting yourself and doing cold swimming like our dear friend Dean, going and plunging through an ice hole like we did in Wisconsin, or filling up pop-up bathtubs and putting a bunch of ice and water and like taking all your yogi friends through it, is it systemic? So what happens, and that a lot of people miss, is when it's systemic, all your blood shunts to the center and protects all your vital organs, which means they get a great flush of blood. And then when you hop out, it's almost like I feel the heat of my body wafting or pushing the cold out. And you end up with better circulation and better ability to warm your extremities. And so because it is applied systemically, I am having a full system effect. And then if I get that delicious shiver response at 5 minutes, my metabolism is activated and I am breaking bonds to feed my system and let off heat to become better at heating myself. There is no localized application where cold can then get trapped. I've seen a lot of success with people who are just consistently cold because they sit in 65-degree air-conditioned air, and there's this sense of being cold all the time. Get better at withstanding the cold and not being so sensitive to the cold by doing what? Throwing their system into a cold that is cold enough to cause a reflex action in the body to have to warm itself.
Yeah.
I can hop in 40 degrees and be warm 5 minutes after. If I go snorkeling for an hour in our nice warm salt water at a temperature that's just too cold, it can take me hours to warm back up.
Yeah. Choosing the activities wisely and the time and duration and temperature are important as well. That's why surfers wear wetsuits in the Pacific. Are you ready for the ultimate blackout experience? So I've had many, many guests on the podcast talking about sleep improvement. You know, I talk about recovery all the time. And one of the things we need to manage in our life is light. If we manage light better, that is from morning until evening, we can have the best sleep of our lives. And one of the ways that I have the best sleep of my life is by having you block out shades installed in my bedroom. I cannot tell you how much my whole bedroom sleep experience and my sanctuary that I get to curl up in at night, do a little breath work, unwind my nervous system from the day, and get some good sleep on, how much that has been bolstered by you block out. This is 100% blackout guarantee. People on the social handle are always like, this is an edit, this is a filter, because you pull down the shades and the room goes completely black. It benefits you with better sleep, complete control of the light in the space from those neighbors who have the lights shining into your window, to getting your kids the sleep that they deserve, temperature regulation, energy saving, full privacy, and getting that glare off your TV screen if you're one of those people that has a television in the bedroom. I use my bedroom for sleeping and for sex, and I think you should too. But what I really think is that you should install these U Blockout shades, the ultimate blackout experience. Check them out at ublockout.com. So what else do you see that's coming up that is sort of interrelated, or things that where you think that either people are, it's not about missing the point, it's just about where there's an expansion to be had. Right? We talked about women and their cycle. We talked about duration, time, and temperature. And are there other places that are coming up, whether it be for males or for communities, where there's just a big push-pull or considerations in the mix of how we're applying cold to our body? Because, you know, with this Rice theory, the gentleman, his name's going to escape me, but the gentleman who came up with that theory, right, we at some point came out and said targeted ice, spot treating ice is actually not the thing to do. And so, you know, how do we shift that into reality? Like, sports teams are no longer doing that. And yes, there are times when people will spot treat with ice. And those times seem to be when someone has a really acute pain, they're just trying to at least blunt or dull the pain because it's so painful in that moment, versus, you know, holding ice, like an ice pack I might have done in my elementary school days. If you have like a bump, a bruise, or a break, that someone's like, put this ice pack on and leave it on as long as you can.
Right. You're doing two things. You're only alleviating swelling and decreasing pain. You're not actually causing a physiological healing response by applying localized, temporary cold packs or ice. And that is the opposite of when you're doing cold exposure, whether that is getting wrist points, ankle points, and a head in. You can still get a systemic effect with that without putting your whole body in. And I think what's coming up within a lot of my patient population and community conversation is really looking at two areas of application. One is psycho-emotional.
There's a great YouTube video called Stop Icing that's been out for years now. That is Kelly Starrett from the Supple Leopard. He's been on this podcast with his lovely wife. And Gary having that conversation to the specifics around why. So it's a deeper dive for people who are interested in that and sports performance, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. Sorry to interrupt, but yes, we got it. We got it.
Thank you. Patients and clients with depression and anxiety, there is this beautiful sweetness that happens with especially being guided through the challenge of finding peace in a very uncomfortable. For me, at one point in time, you saw me, I had to sing myself hilariously so to be able to stay in the ice. Now I'm like, oh, it's peaceful time. And when I was injured, there were times that over my collarbones and my upper spine, it was spicy. And I really looked at that desire, like, why do I make myself do hard things? And then there is this snap to the nervous system when I look at what the world is going through, when I look at what my patients and clients are going through, you know, what we've been through in these past almost 5 years, that mental emotional reset that you get from being in a cold plunge or an ice bath or cold water swimming or a frozen lake creates such a platform of mental an emotional resilience and healing that I haven't seen with many other modalities. And you and I both, the world of breath and cold, and putting those together, it's one of the reasons that I have really welcomed adding community and private ice sessions for a lot of friends, family, patients, because of that emotional resilience component. I can help people zen out all day long, acupuncture treatments, reset the nervous system, downregulate sympathetic drive, help people get out of fatigue or what you might almost look at as being like overly parasympathetic state. You can balance people's nervous systems. But that means that you are, as a practitioner, always showing up to do that work with them / for them. And so one of the beautiful things about helping them through an emotional reset with the ice is they got to do it for themselves. They are and can continue to be the owner of that experience, and that empowerment and the healing that comes from that kind of empowerment. Even if they're like, oh no, you need to be at the side of the tub with me every time, it's still something that they are in control of. That kind of resilience is such an incredible gift. And to be able to stack that with other healing modalities. And this is, again, why the conversation, like my favorite thing is to stack all the fun things that I get to do. We're going to do breath and we're going to do cold. And then you're going to jump on the rebounder. And then we're going to do a lymph session or reverse the last two things order and look at how you can create this greater programming and then give them the homework of the thing that they can do on their own. Where no, I don't want you turning your home plunge down to 33 degrees and getting in there by yourself. But finding the safety parameters where you are at a level where you can face that bit of challenge on your own and know it's always accessible to you or to you and a group of friends without having to go in or have a practitioner come to you. And that empowerment is everything.
It's a minimum effective dose thing.
Yeah.
And I also think it's the other piece of the conversation to have here with anyone who's listening about who either hasn't done cold, is thinking about cold showers. We always talk about it as an okay start, cryotherapy. Okay, maybe those things are the way you start, but that it's absolutely feasible for someone if they want and they choose to start with cold immersion, right? Intentional cold exposure, ice baths, even cold water swimming, depending on making sure that people are not lengthening that time to be like when you were a kid and you're like, hours, I loved swimming in it, just not knowing what detrimentally could happen. But the other piece that's here is women sometimes will show up, and I have to highlight females in this area because men don't have their periods, but women will show up and say, well, I have my period, or I don't want to go in, or I don't feel like going in today, and I'm always about intuition, right? Feel into what is calling you in or not. And that's wonderful. Women will come to my plunging session sometimes and say, yeah, I'm not into it. But maybe by the end of the plunging session, they actually do get in because they've decided and they've seen it. And there's an interesting thing we all have to navigate that is around the reasons for making choices to do hard things or not.
Yep.
Because we can stand by the cold plunge and say, this is too scary for me, and we can let ourselves off the hook. Or we can have some real background saying, I listened to Carrie's episode and I'm going to do cold exposure, but I'm going to decide to do it when I'm ovulating in the middle of my cycle, when I'm feeling really strong and hearty and I can get in the cold and really have that experience. But I always speak to anyone who shows up, men, women, humans who show up to plunge and breathe. How can we regulate and calm our nervous system through the breath and then experience cold in a way that feels successful, right? Even if I want people to stay in for 2 minutes if they don't have any other health conditions and they're generally safe and they're generally healthy and feeling safe. 2 minutes, great. And it's like 30 seconds could be a win for someone, right? If they're just so nervous to get in. And so there's that other thing to navigate that I think sometimes clients in the health world show up to you and I, and someone will say, I just had this intuitive hit, Carrie, that I needed to eat like the whole pizza and a pint of ice cream. It was like a hell yes for me. And it's like, I get that it could be. And at some points, maybe you're celebrating with old college friends who come up or something like that. But in many cases, we are patterning ourselves or giving ourselves the excuse to do the thing that might be the easier road. And so this is something that gets navigated in and amongst the discourse and the conversation around Chinese medicine and around health and well-being and cold, and it's just on trend or it's BS or we don't see enough benefits. And you know how my stance on it, everyone knows my stance on it. It's like the research is important. The evidence is important. You could almost prove anything with evidence and research these days. There's just such a wide swath of all the things that people bring to the table. And time again, thousands of bodies, you have seen this, I have seen this, people's mood boosting ability, like getting in the cold to boost your mood, to help people get through some anxiety, some depression, to navigate their capacity for greatness is what I always speak to. It's undeniable. It's like someone, I hate to refer to Instagram, but I'm going to do it. There's like a gentleman who's in a cold pool with like a waterfall, much like our friend Dean Hall, but it's like a younger guy in there. And he's like, I don't care if it's legit. I don't care if it's on trend. I don't care if the evidence says all these things. I sort of don't really care, because it's like, for me, I get in the cold and it changes my entire day. It powers me forward. I feel like I'm not overdoing it. I feel like I'm healthily plunging into the best version of myself. And that's what it really comes down to in many ways, right? And so people need to partner these ideas. They need nothing is in a vacuum, right? You need to partner how they're feeling, what's going on in their emotional body, physical body, and then having the knowledge that you continue to share with people to make these decisions, effectively. And also absolutist thinking. I just want to say this. At some point, Dan Garner said to me, if anyone comes to you with absolutist thinking, stop working with them.
Yep. Ditch the dogma and the polarization. And so for me, I look at it like, wow, if something is triggering you so hard, that is someplace like, if you feel absolutist about anything, that is where there's stuff to be looked at. Going back to the question you asked a little while ago is also the patient thing. So being a 46-year-old female athlete who has been through crazy illness process, of emaciation from typhoid, there's a conversation about women past a certain age having a hard time building muscle. I don't actually believe that at all. I think it has to do with much deeper levels of our physiology, but the response of the increase of testosterone production in women post-plunge feels like an automatic slingshot to being able to turn around and go into a strength conditioning session and have an easier process of using your strength conditioning to build lean muscle mass at any age. But it's really fascinating to me. And one of the things that I'm calling for more is more scientific studies on female patient population in general. I would like to see studies on hormone production in men and women. We have removed ourselves from living and thriving in nature and all of the biorhythms of nature. We wear filter glasses to make sure that we are not changing our biorhythm because of the artificiality of light. If we go into a sauna, we are giving our body the stressor of a high, hot summer and the adaptations and resilience that comes from being in the stressor of a high, hot summer. When we go into an ice bath, we are reminding ourselves that we were created to go through and have beautiful physiologic cascades happen in the face of the physiologic stressor of winter. All we are doing with these modalities is saying, oh my gosh, we keep it heated to 69 degrees in the winter, and we keep it cool to 69 in the summer, and our bodies don't have to go through any stressor adaptations. So all we're doing with all of these modalities, whether it be sleeping down on an electron mat, filtering your eyes with glasses, changing the bulbs in our houses, stepping into a sauna, or stepping into an ice bath, all we're doing is aligning our chi with the biorhythmic chi of the natural universe outside of 4 modern walls.
Yeah. Comfort zone is killing you. More and more books are coming out. Yeah, more and more books are coming out on this topic and how we are. Yeah, we're softening ourselves. Doesn't mean we can't have these luxuries. Just means what is really a hard thing. What we define as challenging has gotten less challenging. Things can be navigated differently by doing this minimum effective dose, by titrating doses of stress, whether it's heat or it's cold or it's climbing a mountain or whatever, right? It doesn't have to be that it's done by a device or a specific tool.
Yeah.
And for thousands of years, so many cultures have been applying these tools, and our ancestors did this very differently than we did. And so it's a very beautiful point to make around this space and this place too.
There are breaths that are used to be able to warm yourself up. You and I, My Journey to Lhasa is my book recommendation for all. It's the story of how ancient breath practices that taught your body how to warm up and melt the snow around you were brought into the modern world by a British opera singer
I just got it. I read like the first chapter. So yes, great book.
Yay, it's phenomenal. And so it's one of those things, it's like we are designed to be able to be resilient in any natural climate. We grew up and evolved in different places, so perhaps different of our genetics are better at meeting the challenge of different stressors, but we're now all so intermingled that our baseline has to have some degree of screaming for each of the stressors to keep us our most resilient selves.
Very true. Silver biotics. Everyone on this podcast, if you're listening to this podcast for the last few years, you know that I love Silver Biotics toothpaste. The green one, it's amazing. It is my absolute favorite toothpaste on the planet. It is whole body healthy. There's no toxic ingredients. When you look up, this is what I don't love. When you look up all these things online, mouthwash and toothpaste and lozenges and immune support things, and even many facial serums, there's a lot of toxic ingredients across the board in these big name brands. And so why I love Silver Biotics and their entire product line, especially right now, is for their immune support tools. So I have a lot of dental work coming up, some dental surgery. I'm not great at a dentist. Many of us aren't. But not just using the toothpaste, but really bolstering my oral health by utilizing several things that they have. And we're rolling into flu season, as you may feel already. It's coming in hot or cold, as it were. So using the immune support supplement from Silver Biotics, which you swish around in your mouth for about 30 seconds, it bolsters the health of my gums and my teeth. And then you swallow it. Unlike those nasty toxic mouthwashes on the market that ruin your nitric oxide production and all those things, the immune support supplement is beautiful. There's a 30 ppm. That's the one that I use, swish in my mouth and just keeping my gums and teeth intact while I'm going through all these procedures, as well as the immune support supplement that is a nasal spray, just bolstering up carry it every time I go on a plane, bolstering my health and keeping me going strong. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is this wound dressing gel. They call it the Silver Biotics Silver Gel. So Silver Soul technology is in that. And I'm using that off label many times. Yes, I'm using it for cuts and scrapes and bruises and things like that, but I use it for razor burn. It is like nothing I have ever used, ladies and gentlemen. And when I'm at the gym a lot and in the sauna a lot, I'm getting a little bit of this like acne around the forehead, hairline, chin, etc. Like even though I'm washing my face all the time, just a little bit of that acne is coming from the sweat. And so after I clean myself up, I put on a little bit of this silver gel, and it is like nothing else you can even imagine. So I want you to check out Silver Biotics, silverbiotics.com, silverbiotics.com. You use the code WellPower, you get 30% off. It's like gifting season. They have travel size, large sizes. It's all there for you. Check it out. Get as excited as me about Silver Biotics. I want to just sort of reiterate some of the key points we've made over the course of the show to have this conversation, and have you add anything else, because you've told us some really beautiful stories, which is wonderful. Given us a little bit of insight. It's such a deep landscape. It's like almost like you could do a whole 2-hour podcast on just traditional Chinese medicine and the overarching tenets and the landscape of it all. But I want to kind of reiterate some of the things that we talked about just to sort of punch the point home and continue conversations. And certainly anyone who's listening to this who has other insights or ideas or things they want to share can always write into the show and share on social and do all the things that they're doing. And let's keep these conversations going. But the point that we're making in general is really, and that you've shared so eloquently with us today, is that the TCM practitioners out in the world that are saying don't do cold may be saying that for a number of reasons that are backed by traditional Chinese medicine. And it is the poison is in the dose and the style, and whether you're drinking it or you're swimming in something for a long period of time. But we are not blanketing the statement that TCM is very anti-cold plunging, because there are many people who are still doing this.
Yes, I'm one of them.
And you're one of them. Yes. Amazing. And that there is an intuition and a time of the month for women that potentially could be more helpful or more supportive to choose the time of the month that you're cycling to get in the cold. Perhaps that's week 2 or 3, because it feels like you have a rise in estrogen and a little bit more oomph to get into the water.
Yep. I think that meeting your body where it is in that day and looking at whether or not you actually have the vitality to hop in the cold. And I think that it's just important that in general, we're assessing our level of vitality. How did I sleep last night? How have I been eating? What kind of day do I have ahead of me? I want to go back to a point that I did not make it is important to understand the context of the system for both men and women. We spoke specifically about women's menstrual cycles, but I have a lot of guy patients that have a really hard time until they've gotten used to it and their bodies are getting more resilient. But I've had a number of guys have a harder time warming back up after the plunge. And so it's brilliant here because I can just take people outside, wrap them in a thermal blanket and put the sun to their back, and it warms them up. I don't necessarily have to have a TDP lamp or Moxa.
And also, do you want to speak to Moxa, just what it is a little?
Oh,
you've
yes,
mentioned
sorry.
it several times,
So
and I don't want people to be like, Amazon, Moxa, let's go.
No, okay. Moxa is short for moxibustion. It is a heat therapy that we use in Chinese medicine. It is also an internal medicine, herbal medicine that is often used to treat menstrual conditions, Aya. Moxa is mugwort, and it has a couple different forms. It can be looking like a loose herb, and we'll use it and burn it on the needles, or there's scarring moxa where we actually purposely create little burns on the skin to create a stronger immune response at that point. The most common type I do, because I travel with my patients a lot, is indirect moxa. Indirect means it's not applied directly to the skin or to the acupuncture point itself. And it looks like a cigar almost. You light it similarly to an incense stick. Maybe sometime I can do a demo for you to put out there. But
I also have been to places where there's like mugwort pools, and they do, I mean, will people sip it or drink it or soak it?
Yeah. But for this, it emits heat. It also transmits the properties of the herb through the acupuncture point. The heat emitted from the burning moxa stick has been shown to be infrared heat. So it penetrates deeper. And we use it to warm and treat an acupuncture point with or without a needle. And we can also use it to treat along an entire channel. Like my mom, when she was in her cancer journey, she lost feeling in the outer 2/3 of her feet because of full head radiation because of cancer lesions in her brain. And the doctors told her that she would not get feeling back in her feet. I used Moxa only because she couldn't tolerate needles at that point. I used Moxa only to treat her system and to disperse and encourage the movement of chi along those nerve roots. We together got back the feeling in her feet after 3 or 4 treatments. So it's a very powerful treatment on its own. It's also what I use for warming myself up or treating my digestion when I don't feel like giving myself a complete acupuncture treatment. Moxa is something that you can use on yourself at home. However, I highly encourage you to ask your acupuncturist to teach you how to do Moxa on yourself at home, or go take a course, because you can burn yourself, you can hurt yourself, and having an understanding of the patterns of differentiation, so the way we, quote, diagnose patients in Chinese medicine, is important.
They also can work with a practitioner like you. They can go to a TCM person to just make it easier, or an acupuncturist, and have those conversations. Someone who is an acupuncturist who understands the inner workings of TCM.
Right. I have on hand light panels. I have on hand clay-infused towels that direct your body heat back to you as infrared. So there are so many different ways that you can have heat source on hand to help somebody become resilient to the cold. And I feel like that's an important piece of the conversation between a practitioner and their patient. Come to me for a session after, and let's take a look at how it affected your system and how I can help you do this more mindfully, more safely, and partner in it rather than being dogmatic and saying, no, cold is bad.
Also, the shiver response, we hear about the cascade that happens in the body, and there's ways that we can target some of that heat, or just still have people go through the whole process of what they're experiencing from cold. The big elation that happens after, parasympathetic rebound, people are excited. There's so much joy. It doesn't have to feel so technical. I mean, I always like to remind people it's like fine to play in the cold and use these tools in so many different ways and do it in community, of course. And at the end of the day, it starts to be like, hey, how can we do big reincorporation from the beginning? It's both and. We have the opportunity here. Let's just be smart about it, right? Let's understand that context is king, safety is queen, that we have some heat sources. And for people who want to walk slowly through the door, everybody can walk slowly by adjusting time and temperature and just being mindful. I think a lot of this really speaks to, and I'm so thankful that you came on the show today, is because it speaks to the level of awareness we want to have, whether that be proprioception in the way our body moves in space, but just awareness to interoception, how we're feeling on the inside, what's going on in the body. Can we hear our heartbeat? Can we feel our pulse while we're either sitting in the cold or just breathing? And all the ways that we can externally take in the environment. This is all our nervous systems are doing all day long. It's just reading millions of times every millisecond. They're just reading the room and reading everything that's happening almost before we can even think or breathe into that. And as a result, there's many theories that talk about how our space and our thought process and the way that our breathing and our brain neurochemistry and the thoughts that we're having, it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I think really it is a lot of this, like, yes, we are externally checking in, but we are feeling the things that are happening that are triggering the nervous system. And by triggering, I don't mean any kind of heightened response, but just really feeling the temperature and everything that's on our skin and all of the things that are just riding through our body to be able to put us in an up-regulated or down-regulated state, wherever that might be. Anything else you want to add? And I want you to let people know where they can find you on Instagram, websites, all the things, just so they can connect with you, because you are down in beautiful Puerto Rico doing ice and cold.
There's a new website launching soon, Carrie Bacon Wellness. You can find me, Carrie-Bacon, on Instagram. And then I just launched the Caribbean Cold Club page on Instagram for all things breath cold collaboration down here in sunny Puerto Rico.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge. It's always a pleasure. We have had the beautiful opportunity to have a couple conversations on this, and I'm glad we're putting this one out to the world.
Yeah, me too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, girl.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for joining us here on Well Power. You can submit questions, learn more, shop incredible brands, and connect with me at wellpower.life, or follow me on social at biohacking.breath.cold. From comfort to courage, friends, we're doing it. Any foul language you hear is not approved by my mother.